The lights went out first. Not flickered, not dimmed. Out, like someone had reached into the wall and pulled the sun from it. I was halfway through pouring coffee when it happened, and in the sudden dark, I heard Vessa's claws scrape against the kitchen counter as she grabbed it for balance. "Daniel," she said, and her voice had changed. It wasn't the light, breezy tone she used when she asked me what a toaster was for the 5th time. It was low, rough, like something underneath her normal voice had woken up and was speaking through her mouth instead. "Vessa, you okay?" She didn't answer. I heard her breathing get heavy, and then I heard something worse, the sound of her sliding down the cabinet to the floor, slow, like her legs had stopped working. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the kitchen and landed on her, curled against the lower cabinets, her 4 eyes half closed, the pale blue markings on her arms pulsing like they had a heartbeat of their own. "Vessa, look at me." Her head turned toward me, but her eyes didn't focus. They rolled once, twice, and then locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Warm," she said. "I need warm. And dark. And I need you to not touch me for the next 4 days." "4 days? Vessa, what is happening to you?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It cracked in the middle, turned into something closer to a groan. "Cycle season. My body thinks it's home. It's not home. It's your apartment. It doesn't know that." I crouched down next to her, keeping a careful distance, because whatever she was becoming right now did not look like the roommate who had spent the last 3 months trying to understand why humans put shoes on their feet before walking outside. "Talk to me. What do you need? What happens in 4 days?" Her pupils, all 4 of them, dilated at once. My species. When the season hits, we shut down. Body slows. Mind goes somewhere else. It is not dangerous, unless something is dangerous around me. And right now, something is. "What's dangerous?" She reached out, gripped my wrist harder than I thought her thin arm could manage, and said one word. "You." For a second, neither of us moved. Then she let go, and her whole body sagged like a puppet with its strings cut, and she was breathing slow and even, unconscious, right there on my kitchen floor. I want to explain why an alien was on my kitchen floor in the first place, because I promise I am not the kind of person who volunteers for chaos. 6 months ago, the Kainari ship, a small diplomatic scout, had a systems failure over the Pacific, and their emergency shelter program placed refugee crew with human hosts across a dozen countries, while their embassy sorted out permanent housing. I signed up because the stipend was good, and my apartment had an empty second room I never used, and somewhere in my head, I imagined I'd get a polite houseguest who kept to herself. I did not imagine Vessa, who ate cereal with her hands, who asked me detailed technical questions about elevators, who once stayed awake 3 nights straight, trying to understand why humans watched television shows about people cooking food they would never eat. She drove me a little insane. She also made me laugh more than anyone had in years. Somewhere in those 6 months, roommate had started meaning something closer to friend. Which is why, kneeling next to her unconscious body at 2 in the morning with the power out, and her 4 eyes finally closed, I was terrified. I carried her to the couch, because the floor tiles were cold, and she'd said she needed warm. She weighed less than I expected. Lighter bones, maybe, built for a planet with different gravity. I wrapped every blanket I owned around her, and then sat in the armchair across from her, phone flashlight propped on the side table, waiting for the power to come back, or for her to wake up, or for something to make sense. The power didn't come back for 11 hours. I later found out a transformer 3 streets over had blown, unrelated to Vessa, just bad luck with bad timing. But in the moment, with no lights and an alien roommate in some kind of medical crisis on my couch, it felt like the universe had personally decided to test me. She woke up around dawn, gray light coming through the blinds, and the first thing she did was sit bolt upright and scream. Not a human scream. A sound that seemed to come from 3 different places in her throat at once, high and grinding, and I nearly fell out of the chair. "Vessa." She looked at me like she'd never seen me before. Her 4 eyes tracked around the room, fast, panicked, cataloging every exit, every object, every possible threat. Then they landed on me and narrowed. Territory. she said. This is my territory now. Vesa, this is my apartment. Not anymore. She stood up too fast, wobbled, caught herself on the couch arm. During cycle season, the mind reorganizes priority, space, resource, safety. You are a variable I have not yet classified as safe or unsafe. I held both hands up, slow, the way you'd approach an animal that hadn't decided whether to bite you yet. I'm safe. I promise. I'm the guy who's been feeding you cereal for 6 months. Something flickered behind her eyes, a fragment of recognition, and for a second, she looked almost like herself. Daniel, she said, softer. Then the softness collapsed. No, cannot trust memory right now. Memory lies during cycle season. Everything feels safe. Nothing is guaranteed safe. Okay, that's fair. What do you need from me right now, to feel safe? She thought about it, swaying slightly on her feet, and said, distance. And blankets. All of them. And do not make sudden noise. For the next 4 days, I lived by those 3 rules like they were law. I gave her the living room, since she'd claimed it as territory, and fighting that battle seemed both pointless and unwise. I moved my work laptop and every meal I made to the far side of the kitchen, keeping careful distance the way she'd asked. I stopped slamming cabinet doors. I stopped running the blender. I even turned my phone ringer off, because the first time it rang on day 1, she flinched so hard she knocked a lamp off the side table and it shattered on the floor. The mood swings were the hardest part to predict. 1 hour she'd be curled in the nest of blankets she'd built on the couch, quiet, almost peaceful, watching me move around the kitchen with something like curiosity. The next hour she'd be pacing the living room, growling low in her throat at nothing, telling me the walls felt wrong, the air felt wrong, her own skin felt wrong. On the second day she stopped talking to me almost entirely. She'd answer in single words, if she answered at all, and mostly she just watched. It unsettled me more than the growling had. At least the growling was something I could respond to. The silence felt like standing at the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. I started talking to her anyway, even without answers. I told her about my day, which mostly consisted of sitting in the apartment worrying about her, so I stretched the truth a little and told her stories from before she'd moved in. Dumb stories about my job, about my sister who called too much, about the neighbor's dog that barked at the mailman every single day like it was a personal betrayal each time. On the 3rd day, somewhere in the middle of a story about a work meeting that had gone badly, I noticed she was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen since the crisis started. Something soft. Something like the way she used to look at me when she finally understood a human idiom she'd been chasing for a week. Keep talking, she said, voice rough from disuse. It helps. So I kept talking. I talked through making dinner, through washing dishes, through the entire 2nd season of a show she liked that I put on with the volume low, narrating what was happening on screen, because she said the noise of the show itself felt too sharp, but my voice didn't. It wasn't all calm. There were moments that scared me more than I want to admit. On the 3rd night she woke suddenly from what looked like sleep, though I later learned Canary cycle rest wasn't really sleep at all, more like a system running diagnostics on itself. And she was on her feet before I even registered she'd moved, standing in a low crouch in the middle of the living room, eyes locked on the window. Something's outside, she said. It's probably just the wind, Vesa. No, movement. Deliberate movement. I looked. A raccoon was climbing the fence in our backyard, doing exactly what raccoons do at 3 in the morning, minding its own business, and looking for trash to get into. I told her that, gently, and she stayed frozen in her crouch for a long moment before her shoulders finally dropped. I don't like this, she said, and for the first time in 3 days, her voice cracked with something that sounded almost like shame. I don't like not trusting my own judgment. I don't like feeling like the world is full of threats that aren't real. You're not doing anything wrong. Your body's going through something. That doesn't make you broken. She sat back down on the couch, pulling the blankets tighter around her shoulders, and didn't say anything else that night, but she didn't ask me to leave the room either. I stayed in the armchair until sunrise, half asleep, listening for any sound that might mean she needed me. The real danger came on the 4th day, the one she'd told me mattered most, though she hadn't explained why until it was already happening. I woke up to the smell of something burning. I ran into the kitchen and found Vesa standing at the stove, both burners on high, no pan on either of them, staring at the blue flames like she'd forgotten what they were for. The kitchen towel beside the stove had caught, a small curl of orange eating its way up the fabric, and the smoke alarm hadn't gone off yet, but it was only seconds away from filling the apartment with noise she absolutely could not handle in her current state. Vesa, move back. She didn't move. Her eyes were glassy, distant, the way they'd been that very first night on the kitchen floor. Whatever part of her mind normally handled things like fire and danger and stoves seemed to have gone somewhere else entirely. I grabbed the towel, threw it in the sink, and turned the water on, and the small fire hissed out in a cloud of steam. Then I turned off both burners and turned to her, heart still slamming against my ribs. Vesa, hey, look at me. Nothing. Vesa. Her eyes finally shifted, slow, like they were dragging themselves through mud to find me. I was cooking, she said. I wanted to make you the thing with the eggs. You showed me last week. You don't have to cook for me right now. You need to rest. I wanted to do something normal. I'm tired of being a stranger in my own body. Her voice broke on the last word, and something in my chest broke right along with it. I didn't touch her, because I still remembered her warning from the first night, but I sat down on the kitchen floor, right where she'd first collapsed 4 days earlier, and I stayed at eye level with her. You're not a stranger. You're just going through something hard, and it's almost over. You told me 4 days. It's been 4 days. She sank down across from me, slow, careful, like she was testing whether her body would let her, and for a long moment she just breathed, in and out, steady, the pale markings on her arms finally starting to dim from their alarming glow, back down to their normal quiet blue. It's fading, she said, quiet, almost disbelieving. I can feel it fading. That's good. That's really good. I almost burned your apartment down. You put out the fire before it started. Technically, I just helped. She let out a sound that might have been a laugh, small and cracked, but real. Only a human would find a way to make me feel better about almost causing a disaster. We sat on that kitchen floor for another hour, not talking much, just existing near each other, while her body finished whatever process it needed to finish. Around midday, her eyes cleared all at once, like a fog lifting off a window, and she looked at me with an expression I recognized instantly, because it was just her, fully her, present and aware, and slightly horrified. Daniel. What happened? You don't remember? Pieces. Fragments. I remember thinking the mailman's dog barking outside was a coordinated attack. She put her face in her hands. I remember growling at you over a sandwich. You growled at me over several things. The sandwich was actually one of the calmer incidents. She groaned, long and low, and dropped her hands to look at me properly. Did I hurt you? Did I say anything terrible? You didn't hurt me. You told me you didn't trust yourself, and you told me the world felt full of threats that weren't real, and honestly, that might be the most human thing you've ever said to me. Something shifted in her face, surprise maybe, or gratitude, hard to say with a species whose expressions I was still learning to read. You stayed? Of course I stayed. I told you not to touch me. I told you I was dangerous. You told me you needed distance and blankets and quiet. I gave you distance and blankets and quiet. That's not the same as leaving. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with all 4 eyes in that focused way she had when she was working through something important. On my world, she finally said, cycle season is something we go through alone. It is considered a private matter, dangerous to witness. Most Kainari seal themselves away for those 4 days and see no one. Well, I'm not Kainari, so I didn't know the rules. I'm glad you didn't. She reached out, slow, and set her hand briefly over mine on the kitchen floor, the first contact either of us had allowed in 4 days. Thank you for staying, even when I told you not to. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me, even scrambled and glowing and yelling at a raccoon. That earned a real laugh this time, bright and surprised, and it was the best sound I'd heard in 4 days. We spent the rest of that afternoon slowly putting the apartment back together, sweeping up the broken lamp from day one, airing out the smell of smoke from the kitchen. folding the small mountain of blankets that had made up her nest on the couch. She told me more about cycle season as we worked, the biology of it, how her people's bodies had evolved the response back when their planet still had predators large enough to be a genuine threat during vulnerable periods, how the instinct had outlived the predators by several thousand years, but never quite faded from the species. So the burning of the kitchen towel, I said, trying to keep the mood light. That's a leftover survival response too? No, she said, and to her credit she looked genuinely embarrassed. That one was just me forgetting how a stove works. That part is entirely my own fault. I'll take it. I was worried you'd tell me it was some ancient ritual involving fire. If it makes you feel better, on my homeworld, offering someone food after cycle season does have ceremonial meaning. It just usually doesn't come with a kitchen fire attached. Next time, let me handle the stove. Deal. By evening, the apartment looked almost normal again, and Vesa looked almost entirely like herself, tired but steady, her eyes clear and focused, her voice back to its normal light and curious tone. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, a plate of eggs between us that I had cooked this time, and for a while, neither of us said much, just ate, comfortable in a silence that felt earned rather than empty. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Always." "Why didn't you leave? At any point during those 4 days you could have gone to a hotel, called the relocation office, requested a different placement. Most hosts would have." I thought about it honestly before answering, because she deserved an honest answer. Because you're not just some house guest to me anymore. You're my friend. Friends don't leave because things get hard for a few days. She looked down at her plate, and when she looked back up, her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the cycle season markings. On my world, we have a saying. Roughly translated, it means the ones who stay through the dark season are the ones worth keeping close afterward.
That's a nice saying.
It's usually said about family, sometimes about mates. She paused, and something flickered across her face that looked almost like nerves, an emotion I hadn't seen on her before. I think, this time, it applies to something in between those two things. Something I don't have a word for yet in your language. Friendship that survived a kitchen fire and a raccoon standoff. That's a pretty specific category. She laughed again, that same bright surprised sound, and reached across the table to bump her hand against mine, a gesture she'd picked up from watching human television and had clearly decided suited the moment. 4 days down, she said. Only 361 left until it happens again. I'll mark my calendar. You don't have to stay for that one either, you know, next year, if it's too much. I looked at her, steady and certain, the same way I'd looked at her that first terrifying night on the kitchen floor, when I had no idea what was happening, or what I was supposed to do about it. "I'll be here," I said, "blankets and distance and quiet, all ready to go, just maybe I'll hide the matches first." She smiled, all 4 eyes crinkling at the corners in that expression I'd finally learned to recognize as pure, uncomplicated joy, and outside the kitchen window, the sun kept setting the same ordinary way it always had, like the whole world hadn't just spent 4 days holding its breath right along with us.